politics, division between lawmakers and the nation's leader, high-stakes legislation, and questions about the future. Those are some of the challenges being faced in two governments today on two different sides of the Atlantic. I'm Carl Azus for CNN 10, and we're starting in the U.S. Capitol. The partial shutdown of the American government turns 25 days old on Tuesday. And though there have been more than 20 shutdowns since 1976, the current one that started in December is now the longest by at least 4 days. So what does that mean? For about 800,000 government workers who represent 25% of the federal workforce, it means they're still working but not getting their paychecks on time, or that they've been sent home from their jobs without pay until the partial shutdown ends. Some businesses, churches, and restaurants are offering assistance to the people affected. Most Americans aren't directly impacted by a partial shutdown, but some federal operations have slowed down, some federal departments have been closed, and museums like the Smithsonian have also been closed. Who can end it? Congress and the president when they reach an agreement on how the government will be funded. What's stopping them? As part of the funding package, President Donald Trump and Republicans insist that $5.7 billion be included to build a wall or barrier along the border between the U.S. and Mexico. Democrats do not want the wall built, so they insist that the money for it won't be included. Each side blames the other for refusing to compromise. Until they come up with a funding agreement, the partial shutdown continues, and as of last night, there was no end in sight. 10-second trivia. Which of these international organizations was formed in 1993? The European Union, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the League of Nations, or the United Nations? The most recently formed organization here, which was established in 1993, is the European Union. And that brings us to the other government we mentioned earlier, the Parliament of the United Kingdom, because its lawmakers are voting on a proposal to leave the European Union. No country's ever done that before, but British voters chose to in 2016 in a referendum called the Brexit, the British exit from the EU. Through a long and complicated process, the government of British Prime Minister Theresa May reached a Brexit agreement with European officials. But Britain's parliament has to approve it first, and a lot of lawmakers oppose the deal. In fact, what's called the meaningful vote on the deal was originally scheduled for December 11th. But because it looked like Parliament was going to reject it at that time, the vote was delayed until this Tuesday. Prime Minister May has been working to shore up support for the agreement. Her political opponents have been speaking out against it. If Parliament rejects the deal, Britain is still scheduled to leave the EU on March 29th. But what's called a no-deal Brexit could lead to a lot more uncertainty and instability surrounding Britain's departure from the European Union. So officials from around the world are closely watching what happens in Europe today.
There are lots of reasons why people voted Brexit, but many of them are covered by one word: sovereignty. Brexiteers don't like to share it, from how many fish you can catch to who gets to live here and which court ultimately has the final say over British citizens. Many Brits get pretty cranky at the idea of having to follow rules and regulations set in Brussels, often by people they haven't voted for.
Well, no one knows exactly. Parliament's wrestled power back, and the Speaker is now breaking with parliamentary convention, so it's even harder to tell the direction than ever. Hardline Brexiteers still want a clean break from the EU, while more pro-EU MPs want to try and mitigate the economic impact of leaving. All the while, Theresa May is still struggling to discipline her party and command authority, and it seems the only thing MPs are willing to unite on is avoiding a no-deal Brexit.
The Prime Minister wants one thing: the deal she negotiated with the European Union to pass Parliament. Then Brexit can begin on March 29, 2019 at 11 p.m. If her deal passes, there will be a nearly 2-year transition period where the United Kingdom will essentially be held to the same rules as before, as they try to negotiate new trade relationships before December 2020. After that, the United Kingdom will be essentially on its own, no longer subject to European rules on things like trade or immigration, or to the European Courts of Justice.
It's no secret that the EU regrets Brexit and sees it as a historic mistake. If a country as large and as powerful as the United Kingdom wants to leave a club in which it helps shape the single market and benefits from security cooperation, among many other things, what does that say about the club itself? Nothing good. And so from the start, the EU's approach has been damage control.
The British pound has slumped since the UK voted to leave the EU, and it could fall even further in the event of a hard or no-deal Brexit. Now, that may be some good news for tourists hoping for a cheap trip to the UK, and for some British businesses which are export-heavy. But it's bad news for many. The cost of living for Brits is rising as imports become more expensive, and it's a similar story for some British businesses which have to import more materials. Plus, all the uncertainty over what the future trading relationship will be between the UK and the EU, well, that's forced some businesses to already hit their contingency plans. Big banks, for example, have already moved some operations from the UK to the EU.
If Theresa May's deal gets approved, then Brexit will be partly sorted on March 29th, then a little bit more sorted sometime before the end of 2020. Simple. If she fails, as most people expect she will, a few things could happen. She could try renegotiating with the EU, her government could collapse, there could be a general election, a second referendum, a request to extend Article 50, the scrapping of Brexit altogether, or even a no deal.
En fait, ce qu'on voit derrière, c'est une épave d'un sous-marin de la Première Guerre mondiale qui s'est échoué ici le 26 juillet 1917. Et donc la partie que nous voyons là, je suppose que c'est la partie avant du navire, je suppose. Donc c'est un bateau qui faisait à peu près 49 mètres, un peu plus de 49 mètres de long, 540 tonnes de déplacement. C'est un navire mouilleur de mines.
Something's missing in about 1,000 public schools in Los Angeles, California. Teachers. 32,000 of them went on strike Monday. It's the first teachers' strike in Los Angeles in 30 years. Both the teachers' union and the school district say they want the same things: smaller class sizes, higher teacher salaries, and more counselors and nurses. The big disagreement between the two sides is over where the money comes from. The union says the district has more than $1.8 billion in reserve funds. It wants the district to use that money to raise teachers' salaries and hire more workers. But the district says it's already planning to spend everything it has, including the reserve, through the year 2021. Both sides have made some compromises, but not enough to avoid the strike, and they blame each other for that. Meantime, students are still required to go to school. The district says any absences will not be excused. It's hired about 400 substitute teachers and reassigned more than 2,000 administrators to teach, but that's still thousands less than the number of teachers who are on strike. So many parents are facing some tough decisions about what to do. With 600,000 students, the Los Angeles Unified School District is the second largest system in the U.S. behind New York City. Usually when people ask what you've got under the hood of your car, they mean horsepower. This is an entirely different animal. A man in Florida discovered the boa constrictor when he went to do some work on his SUV, and then we called a couple different organizations to remove it. They either couldn't or they wanted to charge more than he could afford. So a neighbor stepped in with a coat hanger and used it to tote away the stowaway. Car trouble can always be dangerous, but this was downright constricting. He had no idea how the intruder snake in. It left him with a Cadillac of options, and he just didn't know how else to escalate it. Thankfully, he didn't own a Viper, a Cobra, a Cougar, Jaguar, or Barracuda. That would have been much more cars for concern. I'm Carl Azus.